Good dialogue isn't the same as real speech, which is often incomprehensible and boring, but nor is it the same as standard written English. It's always sort of somewhere in between, and how close it is to the realities of spoken language will depend on how important linguistic naturalism is to you as an author. So, for instance, linguistic naturalism is really important to the Scottish author Irvine Welsh. The thing is so, Spud, when you're into Skag, that's it. That's all you've got to worry about. Ken Billy, my brother, he's just signed up to go back into the Belfast. I always knew that lackey. Ken what the daft and says to us. He goes, I can't Civvy Street. Being in the army, it's like being a junkie. Only difference is that you didn't get shot so often being a junkie. Besides, it's usually you that does the shooting. That, like say, seems a wee bit like Ken. Aye, but no, listen to now. You just think about it. In the army, they do everything further daft cheap bevy and scabby camp clubs to keep them from going into the town and loaning upsetting the locals and that. When they get into Civvy Street, they've got to do it all for themselves, Ken. Aye, but like say, it's a wee bit different though, goes. Aye, but on the other hand, it really wasn't so important at all to J.G. Ballard. I took a spare copy of the appointments list from my breast pocket and placed it in front of Frances. Recognise the names? All of them. She ran a varnished finger down the column, stabbing at those who had died, mostly the great and the good. I took it from David's computer. I think it's a hit list. That makes sense. It even includes Wilder Penrose. Good for David. Let's kill all the psychiatrists. You don't like Penrose? He's charming, in that brutal way of his. Eden Olympia is a huge experiment for him. All that brochure speak about the first intelligent city, the ideas laboratory of the future, he takes it seriously. Don't you? Sure, we're the vanguard of a new world aristocracy. Penrose would get a shock if he knew that one of his prized pupils set out after breakfast to kill him. I don't think he'd mind. Of course not. He'd be flattered. If you want to move your dialogue in the direction of linguistic naturalism, then here are a few techniques that you can deploy. Short speeches. In conversation, we usually don't speak for very long without our interlocutor interjecting something, even if it's only, aye, whoa, you're not wrong there. Tell me about it. Interruptions and questions. Really? No way. Shut up. The pace of a conversation can be enhanced if characters cut each other off mid-sentence, and this is usually best indicated with a dash. Filling words. Because we need time to think when we talk, a lot of us string together words that actually don't convey any sense. No, but seriously, honestly, not trying to be funny, but at the end of the day, elision, ellipses and contractions. In speech, we often miss out words or contract them together. We tend to say I'd have instead of I would have, and it would only be in very formal speech that someone would say she is going to the shops rather than she's going to the shops. And often we don't finish our sentences once the meanings become clear. So, for instance, you might say, I went down to the bank and it was a holiday, and of course... and then you can just indicate the speech trailing off with an ellipsis. Structural utterances. A lot of what we say has no meaning other than to hold the conversation together and to demonstrate manners. So, for instance, means go on, I'm listening. If someone says, yeah, it's like, then it's showing agreement and affirming the other person while also preparing space in the conversation for a slight shift of topic for a different example. And if your dialogue doesn't have a few of these structural utterances, then it might seem a wee bit stilted and unnatural. Rhetorical questions. Informal conversations often employ the question form, don't they? And of course the thing with these questions is that you don't really expect them to be answered, do you? Do you know what I mean? Incoherence, confusion and pauses. So for instance, when a character asks for something to be repeated, you still seeing Tina? You what? Tina, you still seeing her? Oh Jesus, no, that was a long time ago. And of course characters can hesitate or pause. I think when you write pauses, you're better off just using ellipses rather than writing My personal opinion is that you should never write because I think it tends to just make the character sound like a cliche of a stupid person. So finally we come on to the question of dialect and phonetic spellings. Dialect is a manner of speaking that's particular to a region or subculture. So, for instance, an Edinburgh heroin addict is likely to speak in a different way from a Kentucky farmhand. And the first thing to say about writing accents is if you're going to do it, make sure that you know what accent you're writing. I remember asking an author a while ago, you know, what accent their character was supposed to be speaking in, and they said, well, it's just a general working class accent. Obviously, there's no such thing, you know, like a news agent from Glasgow speaks in a very different voice from a railway worker from Jamaica. If you are going to do an accent, then the next question is, to what extent should you try to spell that phonetically? Phonetically means writing it out the way it sounds. Now, obviously, if you start writing sentences of the sort, do you know the phonetic alphabet, then we're all in serious trouble. And indeed, the history of how authors have used phonetic spellings to render regional speech is sort of uncomfortably bound up with ideas of class and racial superiority. You go back to something like Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and some of the dialogue is almost painful. But I can look for neither horse nor man in a night like this, as black as the chimbley. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that some people sort of caution writers against using phonetic spellings at all. Janet Borroway writes, for instance, dialect should always be achieved by word choice and syntax and misspellings kept to a minimum. They distract and slow the reader, and worse, they tend to make the characters seem stupid rather than regional. There is no point in spelling phonetically any word as it is ordinarily pronounced. Almost all of us say things like for of for of, was for was, and for and, says for says. Nearly everyone drops a G in words ending in ing, and at least now and then. When you misspell these words in dialogue, you indicate that the speaker is ignorant enough to spell them that way when he or she writes. But then again, removing phonetic spellings would greatly detract from the work of such authors as Irvine Welsh, James Kelman, Gail Jones, Roddy Doyle, David Foster Wallace, and many, many others. So perhaps the best advice comes from Anne Lamott. She says, dialogue that's written in dialect is very trying to read. If you can do it brilliantly, fine. If other writers read your work and rave about your use of dialect, go for it. But be positive that you do it well, because otherwise it is a lot of work to read. Thanks a lot for watching, and good luck with your writing.